it really expands on Jaynes's idea that most of our thinking is actually outside of conscious awareness. And we have this illusion,
yes,
we can only be conscious of what we're conscious of, that all thinking is conscious,
yes,
when it's actually
yes, exactly.
very small, a very, very small.
Yes, yes. And what is Jaynes's explanation of how it is that we think we're conscious of everything, but really we're conscious of very little? How does he explain? I explain it with neural pathways, by the way, and that the neural pathways are just nonverbal. It's just a flow of electricity.
Yeah, he uses a memorable metaphor to help people understand this idea of a flashlight looking around a dark room.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And the flashlight is asked, what does it see? And everywhere the flashlight turns, the room is brightly lit. So it concludes it's in a brightly lit room.
Very good.
And that's like our consciousness. We're only conscious of what we're conscious of. So we're not aware of the vast non-conscious aspects to our mentality.
Good. Now, another topic you address in the book is voice hearers, which means people who hear voices. Now, at times, this can become a mental illness, which is labeled as schizophrenia, but you're introducing us to the idea that there are people who are not mentally ill. In other words, they are in touch with reality. So they do hear voices, but they are aware that they've created the voices, but yet they've sort of formed a community to discuss this perception. Tell us a little more about that.
Sure. So this gets into Jaynes's second key idea, and that is, if consciousness is learned, it's recent in history. What was going on before we had consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
And he discovered evidence that as we learned language, the brain began to use language as a way to transmit experience and information from one hemisphere to the other. And it did that using this new technology of language being the best way to transmit information. And so language wasn't just being used to communicate interpersonally, but also between the brain hemispheres. And today we call that an auditory hallucination, where someone hears a voice. It sounds just like someone speaking to them. It has all the external qualities of that. They don't experience it as their inner voice or their sense of self. It feels like coming from the outside generally, or gets complicated. Some people experience it as coming from inside their mind, but as having an external quality to it, like someone is inserting thoughts into their mind. So there's a spectrum of experiences. And Jaynes believes these are vestiges of this earlier mentality that came before we learned consciousness. He called bicameral mentality, or the bicameral mind. And when he published the book, there wasn't a lot of understanding of hallucinations. They were generally seen as only being a symptom of mental illness or schizophrenia. Well, since that time, there's been hundreds of studies, and they found that many people who live completely ordinary, average, normal lives, they're not clinical patients, experience these type of auditory hallucinations, sometimes very infrequently, sometimes every day. And out of that, this Hearing Voices network was formed to help people to understand voices, cope with their voices, and accept their voices. And they take a little bit of a different approach than mainstream psychiatry, where they're not trying to get rid of the voices, but help people incorporate them in a way that they can have a positive benefit from.
Great,
because sometimes the voices can't be gotten away with. Yeah.
This is very reminiscent of the movie Inside Out. People may remember it was a Pixar animation about a girl, and she had 4 voices in her head, which you could label as well-known emotions: joy, fear, etc. And they were represented sort of as a panelist of like news announcers and 4 different ones, and they were continually sort of monitoring what was going on and then sort of consciously discussing with each other what was going on. So it was a very good representation, I think.
Yeah, I saw that a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I have one of my readers actually is a voice hearer, and he told me about, believe it or not, a sitcom done in the 80s, which was about some average guy and has 4 voices in his head played by different actors who are constantly arguing with each other. And so the movie was obviously based on that. The name of that old sitcom is Herman's Head. If anyone wants to look it up, it's fascinating. Herman's Head.
You know, another movie that's relevant here that a lot of people have probably seen is Fight Club. And I didn't see it when it originally came out. And later it was brought to my attention that has many aspects of bicamerality, and that this person is, well, I don't want to spoil the movie for anyone, but it definitely speaks to this topic.
Good. So one topic that you don't cover in the book, I think ADD, or attention deficit, I think was not as big of an issue when Jaynes was alive. But to me, the way I would explain it is if a person is maybe not hearing a voice unless it's externally triggered. So it's as if, to use your flashlight metaphor, whatever makes the loudest noise or the brightest light, you shine your flashlight on that. So you have no perception of having control over the flashlight yourself. And I get correspondence from a lot of readers who have that perception. So I'm just wondering, what is there here that we can help people more feel their power to control their own flashlight?
Well, I haven't looked specifically at studies on attention deficit disorder and what approaches people are taking, but just my first thought on that would be to try meditation. And I think meditation does really help people train their mind and train their inner dialogue and give them a greater control over their introspection and inner dialogue. So that would be something that I would, like to look into more and see what's been done with that. Self-hypnosis, there's a lot of powerful techniques you can use with hypnosis, and so those are some things that might be interesting to look at.
Good. One thing I found really fascinating in Jaynes's book, and I'll just repeat the title of the book again. It's called "The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind." And I should explain that Jaynes goes back to, like, the Bible is some of the first written records, and there are early Egyptian writers, and he explains how this writing, where people attribute their thoughts to external voices, but also the words they use for their physical response, like if your heart is beating faster or you're breathing fast, that the words people used in the past for that suggested what?
Right. So the words that Jaynes looks at are a way to document the dating of this transition from bicameral mentality to consciousness. So in ancient Greece, for example, but it's also been documented now in other cultures in Tibet and China, and this is in the books I've published, there's a number of different words that eventually come to mean conscious mind in ancient Greek. Prior to that, they all had references to bodily or physical processes. Like one is like autonomic
processes that you have no control over.
Yeah, vision was one, or the pounding of one's chest and things like that. And so the thinking is, if they didn't have words for conscious mind, they probably didn't have that psychological experience, and the changing definitions of the words track this
Oh, okay.
development of introspection in ancient history, along with looking at the ancient texts like the Iliad. And when Achilles, for example, comes to a decision point, he doesn't stop and introspect and deliberate his actions. A god appears and directs his behavior and tells him what to do. And this was taken by classicists for a long time as kind of a literary device. And Jaynes came along and said, there's no reason to make that assumption. Let's take them at their word and look at it as though it probably reflects their actual psychological experience.